Dr. Peter McCullough, thank you so much for joining me today for Stay Free with Russell Brand. It's a special occasion to have the honour of your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
The reason I admire you so much is because you're one of those people that stepped up when it mattered and was bold enough to tell the truth when there were obviously consequences, and now you're rightly being rewarded. Your new book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology and Reality, is available now. There's a QR code up on the screen for those of you that want to buy it. Tell me, we're just living in this extraordinary storm of new information. Just today or earlier this week, I was reading that they are now saying, yes, there are not ample clinical trials to claim that there's no connection between, for example, autism and vaccines. Tell me where you stand and what the benefit of reading this book is for a parent and indeed anyone that cares about truth.
Well, like you and so many people around the world, I was blown away with the complete madness that occurred with the COVID-19 vaccine campaign. And with my co-author, John Leake, who is a historian, we decided to look into this and did our own investigation. 300 years of history. We go back to actually Cotton Mather in the United States, 1721, about 50 years before Edward Jenner in the UK. And what we uncovered from the very beginning is that there was an incredible fear of infectious diseases, bold claims made by vaccine developers that couldn't possibly have been true, and then always a tremendous amount of money and power. And early on in vaccines, they didn't even know what caused the disease, let alone whether a product, an injection or something else would stop it. But when we saw things roll out with the COVID-19 vaccine campaign, again, a blind acceptance of the vaccines based on essentially a religious faith, not scientific evidence, then it started to fit together. And so the book is written as a narrative. It's not a boring medical book, and it's not a timeline. It's a character-driven description of what happened, an ideology formed around vaccines, driven by these various factors. And Russell, if I could go a bit further and just say the ideology essentially says this, that we have fear and susceptibility to infectious diseases, that through the brilliance of mankind, man can improve upon God's creation. Man outdoes God with vaccines. However, since the vaccines aren't perfect, in order for this to work, everyone must take them without exception. And if someone is injured or disabled or even dies due to a vaccine, they should accept that. Their family should accept that for the greater good. And that vaccine ideology has been in forward motion now for 300 years.
It's an extraordinary ideology. I've never heard it put so succinctly, but it fits very neatly into a paradigm that I've been exploring for some time myself, where a cumulative human authority undergirded by reason surmounts and surpasses divine authority. And once you accept that as a premise and a principle, you can deploy it, if not arbitrarily, wherever you can employ it, where it's required. You can employ it wherever required. It does seem reasonable. I remember even before I knew any of this stuff, that being kind of skeptical about vaccines when I considered, as the individualist I was, and I suppose to some degree remain, that whilst I can understand the idea that vaccines might be good for the whole, they may not necessarily be good for the individual. And that was sort of voided of any sort of spiritual insights. That was just a kind of my own counter-rational perspective. My rationalism versus their rationalism. I can see that for you might want to vaccinate everyone for the school system or whatever, but my Mabel and my Peggy and my Herbie, I might not want them involved in this. Now, that's before we start to understand the layers of deception and disingenuity that you've already started to unpack in the first few minutes of our conversation. Now, this transition from kind of snake oil selling and, and well-intentioned entrepreneurialism and alchemic brilliance, like that sort of must have preceded the medical profession, was somehow sort of lacquered and shellacked in sigils and insignia of medical authority, perhaps to mask, ironically, just how protean some of these ideas were and how insubstantial and how lacking in the kind of credible clinically undergirded, double-blinded authority that most of us would require before putting substances into our children's body. How exactly did they conduct that bait and switch, Doctor? How did we get from, I don't know, where was it where George Washington famously vaccinated troops where's that famous battle where you guys had, all of the troops were sick and stuff, and they were like literally prior to syringes and stuff vaccinating. How did we get from an open, honest appraisal of the experimental nature, of vaccine ideology into this sort of robust certainty?
We never really had it. We searched for the origins of vaccination. We found some dabbling in Africa and Egypt, but we had to start somewhere in our book. And so we picked a starting point, 1721 in Boston, Massachusetts, and the character of interest is Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather was probably one of the most influential intellectuals of the time in Boston, and he also was a Puritan minister. And he began with variolation, which is taking not a needle, but a scalpel, and taking some pus from one smallpox pustule in one person, and then with a stab of the scalpel, inserting it to the skin of a healthy person to try to protect them. And Cotton Mather, early on, working with Dr. Boylston, proclaimed that this process called variolation, that it was a gift from God. So from the very beginning, a gift from God. Now, Cotton Mather also is well known for another activity he was involved in, and he was one of the consultants to the judges in the Salem witchcraft trial. He believed in witches. And it goes on from there. King Edward III of Britain, he had his children variolated, and two of his children died directly after the procedure. But there was an acceptance here that we were going to accept loss in order to try to protect others. He must have thought it was valuable for his 15 other children. Benjamin Franklin was originally very critical of Cotton Mather, thinking, this is potentially dangerous or may not work. No one even knew what smallpox was, let alone how it spread. But then he lost little Frankie to smallpox. And Ben Franklin did a 180 and said, I'm behind this. If this works, we're going to give it a go. And then Edward Jenner in the UK and Gloucester, essentially he was at the right hand of the king and queen. And we move on to Louis Pasteur. Pasteur, essentially would make bold claims and said, I'll get back to you on the details later. And he made all kinds of claims that he had cured fowl cholera and all kinds of diseases. When his memoirs finally came out in the 1960s, his family released them, we realized most of what Louis Pasteur was claiming wasn't true at all. He was stealing ideas from others. So we can ask the question, who has more arrogance, Louis Pasteur and the Pasteur Institute that was named after him, or Anthony Fauci? There are similar characters here. Remember Fauci proclaiming that he represents science. Very similar. The hubris is, it's been said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And boy, did Fauci rhyme with Pasteur.
Before we continue with our content, here's a quick word from one of our sponsors. Remember, if you get Rumble Premium, you get an ad-free experience. Here's a quick message from one of our partners. I hope it's funny. Do you want to support me? No, I don't. Yes, you do. Support me and support Rumble Premium. You won't only be supporting me, you'll get additional access to Mug Club, that's Crowder's gig, Timcast, that's Tim Paul's racket, and Glenn Greenwald's additional content. Join us on Rumble Premium. We make content every single week through Rumble because Rumble support free speech. When I was under attack from the British government and the British media, Rumble stood firm. Yes, of course, there's crazy people on Rumble. There's crazy people everywhere. There's a crazy person living under this hat. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the right to speak freely together. By supporting Rumble Premium, you're supporting me and content creators like me. You get additional content, and what I will say even more, drink down deep on the delicious irony in this one, you get an ad-free experience. If you want an ad-free experience of Rumble, get Rumble Premium. In the meantime, stay free. If you want to watch any more of this content and you're on YouTube, get off that demonic playground and join us over on Rumble and Rumble Premium. Click the link in the description, get over there. It's extraordinary, actually, how these almost archetypal patterns are observable in this apparent chaotic slew of events passing through time. Where I sort of first noticed that phenomena is in the bold and obvious example of the Russian Revolution, where the centralist, czarist model is replaced, and somehow as if controlled by ethereal magnetic fields, the communism that replaces it, or the Bolshevism initially, eventually becomes a similarly centralized, corrupt institution that coalesces around one individual. It makes me wonder, Doctor, if, as with variolation, there is a requirement to honor whatever forces we cannot understand, the sort of extrasensory, supernatural powers that likely organize, originate, design, create life. When we detach ourselves from that, we create diabolical models, and isn't Lucifer's primary creed the belief that we can set up systems aside from and parallel to God? So Pasteur and Fauci have a peculiar correlative. Now we're at the moment in my country, I can see you're leafing through your own fantastic book endorsed by the Children's Health.
But Russell, before you get off the supernatural, I wanted to point out the cover. So the cover features not only a genetic code, because where we are in now with genetic vaccines, but look at the coin and look at the iconography of this. This is the classic tripartite depiction of a boy about to receive the Eucharist. And instead of receiving the body and blood of Christ, he receives a vaccine. The vaccine replaces his savior. And this was issued by the Pope in 2022. It's a 20-euro coin. And in our book, we describe examples of this all over the world. We found a church in the South Island of New Zealand, which had a big, bold, yellow and red banner over it. It said, "Not even the blood of Jesus Christ can save you from COVID. Get vaccinated."
Oh, my God.
Yes. So the Biden administration rolled out what's called Faith for Vaccines during the COVID vaccine campaign. And he actually, in a sense, co-opted all the religious leaders in the United States. Billions of dollars were spent. And so the entire faith community bought into this religiosity around the COVID vaccines.
I'd never noticed before the emulation of transubstantiation inherent in the body and blood. And when you consider that one of the, am I right, Doctor, in saying that one of the ingredients of is frequently fetal tissue from human embryos, that we're being invited, that's terrifying, that coin, we're being invited to participate in a transubstantiation in which we do not emulate or become like Christ, but what are these Luciferic forces? What are these counterfeit institutions that want us, like God demands, to come like little children, to depend upon them, to trust them, to submit to them? All perfectly reasonable postures when you're dealing with an immanent and transcendent, irreproachable God, but a little more dubious when it's human reason detached from divine principle, which is where reason goes wrong. That's when reason becomes demonic, diabolical, in a way, unreasonable, ironically. And so that's fascinating and terrifying. And of course, one of the things that was most notable was we lost the ability to congregate. We were given a lot of falsehoods that were undergirded. In fact, that's what the pandemic period was characterized by. These are irrefutable truths. Follow these truths. Otherwise, you are a heretic and you must be shamed and you must be destroyed and you are the worst kind of person. And one by one, we've sort of peeled away these various liturgies that we were offered, and each one of them, whether it's masks or social distancing or lockdowns itself or the efficacy of the vaccines or the impact of COVID or the origins of COVID, one by one it's been shown to be absolutely false. And almost, I suppose, like vaccines themselves, Doctor, we participate through faith. Like, I want to believe that there's some way that I can take an injection and be inoculated and immunized against infection. My faith is an ingredient in the vaccine. Now, how is it that we are so, I mean, I guess this is behavior and mass psychology, but why are we so reluctant to, a couple of years down the line, accept exactly what's happened to us? And what kind of effort in communication is going to be required from those of us that are, to various degrees, of course in your case supremely so, aware of the truth of these events and the degree of duplicity of the pandemic period? What is our obligation now? Obviously write this book, but like, I wonder if how people are going to receive such an unwholesome truth.
Believe it or not, they may not receive it at all, or they may not accept it at all. I was honored to lecture at Chautauqua this year, which is an age-old dialectic institution in Western New York, where dignitaries have lectured there, for hundreds of years. And I pointed out that when it's in the medical field and there's self-participation by doctors and nurses and others, we can get deeply off course. And I gave the example of the first great cocaine epidemic from 1860 to 1920. Where virtually every medicinal product, every pharmaceutical company made cocaine products. And doctors and nurses became incredibly hooked on cocaine. It was in Chianti wine and Coca-Cola. And the doctors did not stop themselves. Halsted, the father of modern surgery, Sigmund Freud, they became cocaine addicts. And through that period of time, through that 60 years, in one of our journals, JAMA, which is a well-cited journal, there was one paper of concern regarding cocaine addiction among healthcare providers. Now we fast forward to 1920 to 1978, smoking. By 1950, virtually every doctor and nurse smoked. There was campaigns by Philip Morris and R.G.I. Reynolds and American Tobacco Company. Doctors gave out cigarettes in the waiting room. They proclaimed they were safe and they were studied. And when it was pointed out by two Brits, the epidemiologist was Austin Bradford Hill and the doctor was Richard Dahl, that smoking caused lung cancer. They had the proof in 1950. No one believed them. The Medical Research Council in the UK did not believe them. Surgeon General, 1964, Luther Terry, presented the Surgeon General report on smoking to doctors who were all smoking at the meeting. He said smoking is causing lung cancer. They still rejected it. This went all the way till 1978 before the American Medical Association had its very first campaign about the health hazards of smoking, and then the tobacco settlement in 1990s. So here's two examples where there's great harm being done to the doctors themselves and the public at large, and they refuse to see it or accept it. Now we're 5 years into this COVID-19 vaccine. Some of the biggest supporters of vaccination were the doctors and nurses. And here we are right now. There's not a single chief of medicine at any major institution in the world who's come out and expressed any concern regarding these COVID vaccines. Not a one.
It's very interesting to see that the marketing campaigns deployed now by Merck, Moderna, Pfizer, et al. Focus more on kind of lifestyle. I've seen some advertisements for the UK and the US. Part of your lifestyle, take this COVID vaccine. They've recognised now that it's not a mandatable product, that they have to appeal in a different and more commercial way. And I suppose the lessons of the pandemic are so stark and severe that one can appreciate why they are that people are reluctant to receive them. I suppose it's, if one were to make it a more parochial, it's difficult to accept. Oh my! Like, if we're in cases where children are abused by their parents, it's so sort of seismic to take on board the horror of that reality that it's sort of held at arm's length as a necessary survival strategy. And I suppose that with the pandemic, the conclusions that flow forth from just even a somewhat shallow appreciation of what took place are so stark that it amounts to, you cannot trust the World Health Organization, you cannot trust the American government, you cannot trust the BBC, CNN, the New York Times, you cannot trust your own family GP or medical practitioner, you can't trust nurses in scrubs in TikTok videos dancing around. It's like such a kind of a rejection and a dispelling of the kind of cultural sort of icons and idols that most people would rather just get their head down and have a drink and smoke a cigarette and do a line of coke, rather than sort of confront that you have to repent. You have to turn away from all of it. And it's hard. I mean, I've only been willing to do it because life kicked the absolute shit out of me. That's the only way that I've been able to come to a place of repentance. First through drugs and alcohol that I was chemically dependent on, then through sex, I just loved having sex. I love it. I mean, I'm biologically programmed, one might say, to have sex, and I had high availability. It took fake rape allegations that seemed to be mysteriously concocted and amplified, and I'm yet to stand trial as I ultimately will in the UK by God's grace in June next year. It took that for me to have a look at, what are you worshipping? What do you consider to be important? What matters to you? Where are you getting your meaning from? So I understand it. I understand it. Most people are not going to when you sort of look at vaccines, beyond COVID vaccines, and look at the childhood immunization, who among us want to start unpeeling that and unraveling, oh my God, I've given my kid this thing and it doesn't work and it might have been deleterious. I can understand it.
It's a mind-blowing reality, and you're right. The portrayal now of vaccination is something like it's an elixir of youth or health, or it purchases freedom. My next door neighbor is a proponent of COVID vaccination. He's had 7 of them. And he always tells me, I'm well. He points to his arm and he's well, as if synthetic messenger RNA makes you more healthy than what you were, as a normal, natural human being. But let me tell you, we're doing a lot of research here in Dallas at McCullough Foundation in my clinic. I'm in practice as a practicing doctor. And like you, I've faced adversity through the pandemic, but my patients have taught me much, that the COVID vaccines have record injuries, disabilities, and deaths worldwide. I think many millions of people have died from a vaccine. Previously healthy people have lost their life with a vaccine that was supposed to protect them. Instead, it took their life or caused heart damage or blood clot or stroke or neurologic problems or cancer, and the risk goes on and on. But I have patients in my practice in research where the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine is circulating in their bloodstream with the dangerous spike protein that it produces 3.2 years after the shots. These vaccines don't go away. This is the difference between prior vaccines and the COVID shots. Now, the AstraZeneca and Janssen vaccines, those companies were ethical. They pulled their products off the market because they caused blood clots, and that's really the underlying reason why they're gone. But Pfizer and Moderna have persisted, and so is another company called Novavax. Interestingly, Novavax is just the spike protein, no genetics, far and away the safest vaccine in America, and our CDC and government never mentions it. It's never featured. So we've seen just the most bizarre sets of medical behaviors. Complete trust has been lost because there's been the suppression of early treatment, inadequate hospital treatment, and now this relentless pursuit of the vaccine. The public has woken up. A recent Rasmussen survey indicates 56% of Americans believe the COVID vaccines have caused large numbers of deaths. And yet we've had two presidents, no acknowledgement of this. All of our HHS secretaries, Robert F. Kennedy included, right now in office, will not acknowledge what's happened with the COVID vaccines. None of your prime ministers in the UK or your health directors. There's been no inspection of the vaccines to see what's going wrong. Are they contaminated? Are they the vials appear to be different in research in terms of risk. And no country has undertaken a safety review of what really has happened, nor have they proposed to take them off the market. And so we're down in the United States. My estimate is less than 1% are taking these shots. Yet there's a complete purchase of these, and they're just poured down the drain. And this has been going on for years.
If you want to watch any more of this content and you're on YouTube, get off that demonic playground and join us over on Rumble and Rumble Premium. Click the link in the description, get over there. Because it's not an anomaly, and neither is it actually enormous, though the story is. It's merely an observable symptom of systemic corruption that you would find in every area where there are relationships between commercial entities of that size and bureaucratic bodies of that size. It's the modus operandi of state and commerce at the global level. And so I suppose that by investigating it explicitly and transparently, they would literally have to disband their entire model.
Oh, for sure. Russell, I want to get to an important development. The McCullough Foundation received a grant and undertook a year-long review of this issue of childhood vaccines and autism. It's very important. This was published on the European Commission preprint server October 27th, 2025. We had a press release. This was widely covered in the U.S. media and shows really across the world. And with over 300 studies reviewed, our conclusions were that there are risk factors for autism, which is in epidemic proportions now in all westernized countries. The risk factors include premature delivery, older parents, some exposures during pregnancy, like heavy psychiatric drugs, and then common genetic variants. But far and away, the biggest risk factor for the development of autism is combination vaccines. And so since 1986, in the United States, the companies have been relieved of any liability for their products. The number of vaccines have exploded. And as you learned at the Children's Health Defense Conference and others, there is this asymptotic rise in the rates of autism. We're not talking about just quirky young kids and children. We're talking about profound autism, children who can't speak to their parents. They were normal. They were born normal. And after a big battery of vaccines, they had brain inflammation called encephalitis and now have taken on this post-encephalitic state, which includes the inability to speak, markedly impaired intelligence, unable to navigate in the bathroom, repetitive head banging, injurious behavior. We now have 27% of the entire pool of autism having profound autism, and the biggest modifiable risk factor is combination vaccines. We've concluded that there's more children in the United States today with profound autism, completely disabled, than there ever was with polio. We've, in a sense, caused a major public health crisis through this vaccine ideology. And given the McCullough Foundation report, which is the only thing that's changed in the last 3 weeks, our CDC quietly on November 19th, 2025, no press release, no announcement by Robert F. Kennedy or anybody else. They changed their language on the website to say, our prior position on this, that the vaccines don't cause autism, that wasn't right. It wasn't based on evidence. And we're now going to look into this. We're going to do our own report. And that's what I've been encouraging. We sent this report to Robert F. Kennedy, all the public health officials in the United States, on the day we released it. And the report has not been criticized by anybody in the medical community because it includes every single bit of scientific data that's evolved on this. The prior 29 studies that claimed there was no link to autism, this is astounding. And many of them come from what's called the Danish cohort study in Denmark. Those studies never examined the vaccine record of the child, never interviewed the parents, and never actually examined the child to see if they had autism. They were based on computer automated data. So the real live observation of a normal child getting a battery of vaccines and then being converted to autism, that came out in case series data, most of it since the CDC has actually made their original statements. So we think our report, supported by lots of activism over the last 10 or 20 years by organizations like Children's Health Defense and recently World Council for Health in the UK and others, they played a role, but it was our evidence-based report that essentially forced the CDC to change their statements And immediately they're attacked. So CNN now has completely turned against the CDC. They used to be in lockstep with one another during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, there's points where I myself reach a threshold of fury that's difficult to maintain, and I suppose that's part of the challenge of operating in this space, is being able to withstand the truth without going kind of crazy. When this was unfolding initially, Doctor, what I mean to say is, when we were told, oh, there's an outbreak of a virus in Wuhan, China, are you able to now, with hindsight, at the end of 2025, to almost narrativize how that unfolded, of like what that was like for you as a person that had a degree of understanding of did you, for example, go, Wuhan, haven't they got that Institute of Virology there? And that seems odd. This is peculiar. Well, how was it for you when the events were unfolding, and how quickly did you suspect that this was not just what we were being told? Hey, there's this virus. It's a bit like swine flu or bird flu or smallpox in 1970. What was that like for you, and what were the markers that something other than what was being explained was taking place?
Yeah, there was a paper published in Lancet early on. It was kind of the investigation of the initial cases in Wuhan. And, the conclusion is, well, it came out of a wet market, a fish market. But in that paper, at least a third of the cases had never gone to the fish market. And there was, the Wuhan Institute of Virology there, which is, the Chinese nationwide research lab for virology. Now, I had no idea that the U.S. was working with the Chinese on the creation of a virus. I hadn't read the prior papers by Ralph Barrick in 2015 and 2016 in Nature Medicine that precedes the National Academy of Science. These papers are still in print today. They said, listen, we're working with the Chinese. We're creating a coronavirus. They actually named it a SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 coronavirus. And they were trying to create a vaccine at the same time. And so, this was actually right in plain sight. Johns Hopkins and the Gates Foundation held an event in 2017. It was called the SPARS pandemic. And they said there will be a coronavirus pandemic. They said it's going to happen in 2025. So they were off by about 5 years. They said it's going to come out of China. And they published their proceedings. I wasn't paying attention. Then November 2019, the Gates Foundation and again, Johns Hopkins hold a videoed event, Event 201. And there, Avril Haines, who was at the World Economic Forum, who became our national security advisor under Biden, she attends there. And George Gao, the Chinese CDC director, attends, and many other dignitaries attend Event 201. And they said, for sure, there's going to be a coronavirus pandemic. It's going to come out of China. And this is exactly how it's going to be played in terms of vaccination being the primary role. In fact, Avril Haines and George Gao, their workout group in Event 201 was, how do we conceal that it comes out of a lab? So, Russell, this was all in the open. The shortcoming is, it's certainly from my perspective, I wasn't paying attention. Now, there are many books published on this that have pieced together the entire timeline. And bring it fast forward, Anthony Fauci, who is part of the co-conspiratorial team to create SARS-CoV-2, he gets a preemptive 10-year pardon. Almost certainly he requested that from Biden before Biden leaves his term. 10 years of clemency for crimes that he knows he committed in the creation of SARS-CoV-2, in the fraudulent misrepresentation of what was going on to America, the suppression of early treatment, and the promotion of the vaccines. And that combination led to a catastrophic loss of life.
We can't bring you this content without the support of our partners. Here's a message from one now. Do you want to support me? No, I don't. Yes, you do. Support me and support Rumble Premium. You won't only be supporting me, you'll get additional access to Mug Club, that's Crowder's gig, Timcast, that's Tim Paul's racket, and Glenn Greenwald's additional content. Join us on Rumble Premium. We make content every single week through Rumble because Rumble support free speech. When I was under attack from the British government and the British media, Rumble stood firm. Yes, of course, there's crazy people on Rumble. There's crazy people everywhere. There's a crazy person living under this hat. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have the right to speak freely together. By supporting Rumble Premium, you're supporting me and content creators like me. You get additional content, and what I will say even more, drink down deep on the delicious irony in this one, you get an ad-free experience. If you want an ad-free experience of Rumble, get Rumble Premium. In the meantime, stay free. It's not only that the events themselves are so staggering, it's that when they are coupled with the way that this pandemic was initially rendered, that I get a kind of almost visceral sense of vertigo. I kind of feel like overwhelmed because I'm remembering how Anthony Fauci was kind of packaged in this saintly manner, and like how innocuous cultural artifacts like late night talk shows were participating. Then in my country, the UK, ghoulish condemnatory campaigns urging you to get vaccinated on a moral basis in much the way you described at the beginning of our conversation has always been concomitant with vaccine ideology, that it's your responsibility as a participant and member of the whole, the congregation, the community, to do this. And I actually, when I think of Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci, I can remember reading parts of it because it's dense. It's a very good book, but it's kind of dense, and thinking this can't be true. It can't be true that he's involved in this anthrax experimentation. It can't be true that HIV is somehow involved. It can't. There's been so many things that even I, who's somewhat open-minded to these ideas, and sometimes to a fault, willing to accept anti-establishment idea. I've got a kind of appetite, Doctor, to when sort of people are talking about the Epstein files, I'm like, good, I hope this person is exposed. I hope this person is exposed, because I'm now I've been radicalized by circumstance. So I want this system to be attacked. I want them to be brought down. I want them to be exposed. I'm no longer a neutral participant in trying to tell the truth. I'm not like you, a scientist. I'm a evangelist, So it's extraordinary to just look back at something that's so recent, even though time itself appears to be warping and bending because, in a way, information is moving so quickly. How can we have an objective sense of time when data is, we're being inundated, literally? So I wonder then, if there can ever be adequate reprisal. I mean, looking at your McCullough Foundation report here on the determinants of autism spectrum disorder, a name that I'm familiar with here is Andrew Wakefield, who I met for the first time at their recent Children's Health Defence event that we're both affiliated with. And I feel like Andrew Wakefield was more or less sort of called a paedophile and dragged through the streets and pelted with fruit and eggs. And wasn't he just ahead of it and telling the truth?
Well, there you go. Do you know that in every one of these examples in public health, the person who makes the seminal observation is not celebrated, is not bestowed awards. In fact, they're denigrated, castigated, and sometimes lose their life. I mean, a great example is Ignaz Semmelweis, 1855. Semmelweis does careful research and discovers that doctors are transmitting infections to pregnant women in maternity wards in Vienna by not washing their hands. They just transmit the bacteria from one woman to another. And he does studies showing if they wash their hands with chlorinated lime, the infection rates plummet. But instead of being celebrated, he's debarred, debunked. If it was modern day, his Twitter account would be taken away. He'd be debanked, and ultimately he was placed in an insane asylum, probably beaten, and he died. And that was in about a 20-year time span. And he had all the data. He was lecturing. Andrew Wakefield, and it's very interesting. He's a gastroenterologic surgeon. You met him. I'm sure your opinion is he seems pretty reasonable, pretty rational. He seems like a gentleman. He's not some wild individual. He makes an observation that when children get the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella, and that was a combination product, new one at the time, 1998, that some children get sick, they get a fever, they have changes actually in their GI tract, the lymph nodes around the GI tract, and they convert to autism. They were normal, they convert to autism. Well, this paper is published in Lancet. I've published in Lancet, one of the best medical journals in the world, and it's a valid paper for 13 years. 13 years as a valid paper. But under tremendous pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, ultimately the paper's retracted. And through that period of time, Wakefield is smeared largely by journalists who are probably hired by the biopharmaceutical complex. He's debarred, struck off the register, if you will, and then he moves to the United States. What happened to Andrew Wakefield is nearly identical to Ignaz Semmelweis. Of course, both are right. And what we did in our report is we reached out to Dr. Wakefield and said, listen, we've got a lot of academic firepower. We have the truth at the McCullough Foundation. We want you to be an author and make sure we're correct on how we described what happened with his what's called seminal observation. He made a seminal observation. And now you see it all over social media that Dr. Wakefield has been vindicated. In fact, Senator Ron Johnson has put out a public call for the vindication of Andrew Wakefield. So hopefully, we'll all live long enough to be vindicated. I mentioned smoking, by the way, and Richard Dahl in the UK. Richard Dahl ultimately was knighted. He was knighted for being correct, and there's been books written about him where he's finally vindicated. But from the time he made the observation until his vindication was about 45 years. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, think about this.
Tough path.
Andrew Wakefield, but Russell, Andrew Wakefield makes the observation in 1998. So, here we are, 2 + 25. We're at 27 years. And if you do any search on Andrew Wakefield, the first thing you tell you is he's a conspiracy theorist. He's corrupt. He's an anti-vaxxer. He took money from family members, or all kinds of untruths. And that's one of the problems with artificial intelligence is it's completely poisoned now by those who are programming artificial intelligence and how it portrays information.
Yeah, check this. Like as you said, you put it into Google, which is just all you really want from Google is information. Andrew Wakefield is an English fraudster, anti-vaccine activist, and former senior surgeon. He was struck off the medical register. I wonder how long I have to scroll down. The MMR vaccine, autism, refutation, retraction, PMC, measles, mumps, and vaccine, behavioural, long read. Doctor Who fooled the world. Andrew Wakefield, British Medical Journal, charges fraud. In a way, you start to see how the machine works. It's very difficult for me not to be sort of personally affected by this, because inadvertently I strolled into this territory myself just because I had a YouTube channel and that's the way that I work, and it's a kind of natural progression. If you work in media and you're competent at communicating, you realize that there's no requirement anymore for the brokerage of centralized systems, whether they're movie studios or TV organizations or production companies, particularly if you're someone like me, where stand-up comedy was always what was most expedient, because that's the minimal brokerage. But as a sort of a moral man, I have to acknowledge that promiscuity by its nature is morally transgressive unless you are hedonic and decadent and living within a hedonic and decadent set of a value system. So you know, what's been very difficult for me is acknowledging that promiscuity, when you're a famous man and sleeping with 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, you know, when I was 30, when I was younger, is like, that's morally incorrect. But what happens is you can use the raw material of a promiscuous person who's, like, you know, at the scale that I was operating at, been in lots of restrooms and bathrooms with strangers. You can mobilize and metastasize that if you've got an appetite very easily. And I bet the initial journalists involved in the reports that led to criminal investigations, which will lead to me standing trial, I bet these journalists are not thinking, let's destroy Russell Brand, he's a great guy, but, you know, we can... I bet they think they're doing great work. Oh, this guy's been exploiting women. We can really do something worthwhile. In the same way that people that are attacking anyone who's in the crosshairs of the system just because they're inconvenient, just because the system's recalibrating itself. The system, like, the fact is were it not for independent media, that entire pandemic period would be regarded differently. That 56% of Americans that now regard the vaccines as cynically, skeptically, dubiously, that is because of Joe Rogan. That's because of a whole new strata of media has gotten out of hand because of the technology, and they can't get it back in the box fast enough. Indeed, I consider the kind of real arms race of our time, Doctor, to be kind of an information war. Wasn't Alex Jones perspicacious there with that title? That can they centralize control of information before too many people are turned off forever from these institutions? Like, look at that WHO treaty that included in it the ability for confiscatory tax, but also for the ability to censor. Like something like that WHO treaty would have passed, may yet pass, but would have passed were it not for robust opposition that coming primarily out of independent media, responding to experts like you that no longer are gate-kept in the manner that they once were. And it's just interesting to watch the collateral damage, particularly for me because I'm part of it, like to just see how this thing just sort of spawned and got out of control, and the countermeasures to retain control, what's included within it. It's fascinating and terrifying. Jay Bhattacharya being a great example, because when I sort of first spoke to Jay Bhattacharya, he was like me in a kind of a state of bewilderment. And now there he is at the NIH, or Marty Makary now at the FDA. I mean, one of the things that I'm encouraged by, and I can sort of sense in your tone and timbre, Doctor, that you're perhaps frustrated that Secretary Kennedy hasn't done more. You know, for example, when you said to this day they've not said the COVID vaccines explicitly don't take them, you know, like, but you must have had enough interfacing yourself with these institutions of power to recognize why that is. What do you feel?
But what sure is codified into law as these individuals enter the government. If they break from the government narrative, they're on their own. They actually have to get their own lawyers, and they can be accused and tried of all kinds of things. So they actually have to follow a government narrative. Now, Bhattacharya and Makary were in my frequent contributor group at Fox. I still am. I was on hundreds of times during the pandemic, and it gave a counter narrative to Fauci. But I was the only one in that group who recognized the harm of the vaccines and was willing to speak my mind. The others never broke that vaccine ideology, and they took the shots as well. And once people take the vaccines, it's very hard for them to recognize that they have done harm to their body, their children have done harm to their children, and as doctors, done harm to their patients. So most actually adopt these psychological coping mechanisms. And the most common one is they just don't want to talk about it. And so we come up to this all the time. We have family members that say, listen, we don't want to talk about it. And so I said, listen, we can talk about blood pressure medicines, cholesterol, we can talk about anything, but we can't talk about vaccines. And so something is wrong with the vaccines, and the ship turns very slowly, and it's good to have a new crew in Washington, no doubt about it. But one thing I've learned is if you're not in government, you actually influence public policy a lot more, and public sentiment. You can actually influence history a lot more if you're not in government. And that's exactly what we've done at the McCullough Foundation. There's no doubt about it. We've changed public sentiment. This book is New York Times bestseller, despite the New York Times probably doing everything they can to suppress, our book. And so you can't stop it. You can't stop Russell Brand. You can't stop Dr. Peter McCullough. And you're right. Independent media now is becoming, very dominant. And this government aspiration of totalitarianism is falling apart. Remember the statement by Jacinda Ardern, former Prime Minister of New Zealand. During the pandemic, she said, there will be a single source of truth. Think about that aspiration. I mean, that's the same thing that's said in North Korea. There's one channel on TV. There is a single source of truth in Korea. But, that was said by a leader of a democratic country.
You can only do that if you're God, and you can only make those declarations if you want to replace God. There should be a single source of truth, and it should not be human. Dr. Peter McCullough's book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology and Reality, is available now. You can simply use this QR code on the screen now to purchase a copy of this book. Please do that. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today. Thank you for your time and your attention and your bravery, and for this excellent research and fantastic work.
Thank you.
God bless you, sir. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Please do get Peter McCullough's book by clicking on the QR code or the link in the description underneath, and support